A millionaire always believed he was incapable of having children until he saw a child identical to him on the street. And when he discovered the reason, his tears began to fall. The sky over New York City was grey that Thursday afternoon, as if sensing the storm about to break over the life of Richard Dawson. The 45-year-old businessman walked down Fifth Avenue with the confidence of someone who had conquered the world. His custom-made Italian suit and platinum watch were symbols of the empire he had built from scratch. Richard checked his latest smartphone. 15 minutes until his next meeting. Enough time for an espresso at his favorite spot. He smiled, satisfied with the precision of his meticulously planned routine. Then the universe decided to roll its dice. A child's laughter cut through the air, standing out amidst the traffic noise. Richard looked up from his phone, more out of reflex than interest, and in that instant, time seemed to freeze. Less than 30 feet away, a boy of about 10 was playing with a paper airplane. The boy had tousled brown hair, lively green eyes, and a smile Richard knew all too well. It was the same one he saw every morning in the mirror. Richard's heart skipped a beat. He blinked repeatedly, sure he was hallucinating. But the image persisted. The boy was his exact copy, as if someone had found a photo of his childhood and brought it to life. "Impossible," Richard murmured, his voice barely audible. Long suppressed memories flooded his mind. The cold office of Dr. Stevens, 15 years ago. The relentless diagnosis, "I'm sorry, Mr. Dawson, but you are sterile. You won't be able to have children naturally." Those words had redefined the course of his life. Richard threw himself into business, transforming Dawson Enterprises into a giant in the financial market. After all, if he couldn't leave a legacy through children, he would leave one through his corporate empire. The boy threw the paper airplane, which glided gracefully through the air. Richard felt a sudden dizziness. How could there be a child so similar to him? And why now, after so long? Without thinking, Richard took a step toward the boy. He needed to see up close, confirm he wasn't going crazy. But before he could get closer, a female voice called out, "Peter!" "Come on, son, we're late." The name hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Peter, the name he and Sarah had chosen for their future son so many years ago, before the dream of a family was brutally interrupted by the diagnosis. A woman with dark hair approached the boy, taking his hand. For a brief moment, Richard saw her profile and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Sarah, 15 years had passed, but he would recognize her anywhere. The same Sarah who had broken his heart by ending their relationship, unable to cope with the reality of a future without children. Before Richard could react, Sarah and the boy, Peter, disappeared into the crowd. He stood paralyzed, his world spinning in slow motion. Questions exploded in his mind like fireworks. How was this possible? Could Peter be his son? But what about the diagnosis? Had Sarah betrayed him? Or was there another explanation for this incredible coincidence? Richard's phone vibrated, reminding him of the imminent meeting. Mechanically, he resumed his path. But each step seemed to take him further from the reality he knew. His mind buzzed with possibilities and theories, each more improbable than the last. Entering the mirrored elevator of the Dawson Enterprises building, Richard stared at his reflection. The man looking back at him seemed like a stranger. Where there was once certainty, now there were only doubts. One thing was certain. His orderly and predictable life had just been turned upside down, and Richard Dawson, the man who always had answers for everything, now faced the greatest mystery of his life. As the elevator ascended, taking him to the meeting that seemed so crucial just minutes ago, Richard made a decision. He would discover the truth, no matter the cost. After all, if there was even the slightest possibility that the boy was his son. The elevator doors opened on the top floor. Richard adjusted his tie, put on his mask of an unyielding CEO, and entered the meeting room. But in the recesses of his mind, a single question echoed, promising to change everything. Who was Peter? And what did his existence mean for the carefully constructed world of Richard Dawson? This opening chapter establishes the central conflict of the story, introduces the protagonist, and creates an intriguing mystery that should keep the reader curious and engaged. The narrative mixes the protagonist's routine with the impactful event that triggers the plot, creating a contrast that highlights the magnitude of the discovery. The chapter ends with open questions, encouraging the reader to continue the story to find the answers. Richard barely remembered how he managed to conduct the meeting. His mind was miles away, reliving the surreal encounter on Fifth Avenue. When he finally found himself alone in his office, he loosened his tie and collapsed into his leather chair. "Mr. Dawson," his secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Charles Anderson is here to see you." Richard hesitated. Charles was his lawyer and closest friend. If someone like Richard could still have friends. "Send him in," he replied, composing himself. Charles entered, his face showing concern. "Richard, are you okay? You seemed distant in the meeting." For a moment, Richard considered sharing his experience, but years of distrust made him hold back. "I'm fine. Just tired." Charles didn't seem convinced, but changed the subject. "What did you think of the merger proposal?" The conversation drifted to business, but Richard's mind wandered. 15 years ago, he would have told Charles everything. Now, he felt alone even in the presence of his closest confidant. After Charles left, Richard locked his office door and did something he hadn't done in years. He delved into his memories, Dr. Stevens' office, the diagnosis that changed everything. "Mr. Dawson, the tests are conclusive. You are sterile." The words still hurt even after all this time. Richard remembered how he left that office, stunned, heading straight for the apartment he shared with Sarah. Sarah, her face when he broke the news, the mix of shock, sadness, and something else, something he couldn't decipher at the time. The following months were a blur of tense arguments, prolonged silences, and shattered dreams. Until one day, "I can't do this anymore, Richard. I can't live like this." Sarah left on a rainy morning, leaving behind only a letter and the echo of unfulfilled promises. Richard shook his head, returning to the present. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Sigma Investigations Agency. Good afternoon. This is Richard Dawson. I need your services. It's a delicate matter." Minutes later, Richard hung up, having provided all the information he had about Sarah and the mysterious boy. The agency promised results in 48 hours. While waiting, Richard immersed himself in work with almost manic intensity. But even the complexities of the corporate world couldn't keep his thoughts away from the boy on Fifth Avenue. On the morning of the third day, a brown envelope awaited him on his desk. With trembling hands, Richard opened it. The first pages confirmed his suspicions. The boy was indeed Sarah's son, full name, Peter Johnson. Born on April 10, 2010, exactly 9 months after Sarah's departure. Richard's heart raced. The dates matched perfectly. But how was it possible? Turning the page, his eyes widened. There was a copy of Peter's birth certificate, and in the father field, Richard Dawson's name was clearly printed. The world seemed to spin. Richard clung to the desk, trying to process the information. How could his name be there? He had never known about Peter, never signed anything, but the proof was right before his eyes. On impulse, Richard picked up the phone. "Cancel my appointments for today," he ordered his secretary, "and call my driver. Now." Minutes later, he was in the back seat of his limousine, his mind in turmoil. "To St. Luke's Hospital," he instructed the driver. It was time for a long-overdue conversation with Dr. Stevens. As the car cut through New York City's traffic, Richard looked out the window without really seeing. 15 years of certainties were crumbling. Who had lied? Sarah. The doctor? Or was there something even more sinister at play? One thing was certain. Richard Dawson would not rest until he discovered the truth, even if it meant unearthing long-buried secrets. The hospital loomed on the horizon. Richard adjusted his tie, preparing for the confrontation. The search for answers was just beginning. This chapter deepens the mystery established in the first E, providing more context about Richard's past and introducing new, intriguing elements. The discovery of Richard's name on the birth certificate adds an extra layer of complexity to the plot, raising questions about who is lying and why. The chapter ends with a hook that promises more revelations, keeping the reader engaged and eager to continue the story. St. Luke's Hospital stood imposingly against the New York skyline, its white walls reflecting the afternoon sun. Richard adjusted his jacket as he stepped out of the limousine, his face a mask of determination. "Say, wait here," he instructed his driver, entering the lobby with firm steps. At the reception desk, a young attendant smiled. "How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Dr. Stevens. It's urgent." "I'm sorry, sir, but Dr. Stevens is in surgery and—" Richard leaned over the counter, his voice low and intense. "Listen, miss, I'm Richard Dawson. I'm sure that name means something to Dr. Stevens. Tell him I'm here now." 15 minutes later, Richard was led to a small consultation room. Dr. Stevens entered, still wearing his surgical gown, a look of surprise on his aged face. "Mr. Dawson, what a surprise. What brings you here after all these years?" Richard got straight to the point. He threw the copy of the birth certificate on the table. "Explain this." The doctor visibly paled at the sight of the document. I don't understand." "Don't lie to me," Richard's voice thundered. "You told me I was sterile, and now I find out I have a son. How is that possible?" Dr. Stevens ran a hand through his grey hair, visibly disturbed. "Mr. Dawson, I really don't know how this is possible. Your diagnosis was clear. Azoospermia. No viable sperm. Then how do you explain this?" Richard pointed to the name on the certificate. The doctor examined the document, frowning. This doesn't make sense. I never signed a paternity declaration for you." "Someone is lying, doctor. And I intend to find out who—" Dr. Stevens seemed to age years in seconds. "Mr. Dawson, I can assure you that the tests we conducted at the time were conclusive. I personally supervised—" "Do the test again," Richard interrupted. "Excuse me?" "Now, do the fertility test again. I want results today." The doctor hesitated. "Mr. Dawson, it's not that simple. There are procedures, schedules." Richard pulled out his checkbook. "How much?" 2 hours later, Richard was back in the consultation room, anxiously awaiting the results. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls from Charles, the secretary, executives awaiting crucial decisions. Everything seemed insignificant compared to what he was about to discover. Dr. Stevens entered, holding a folder. His face was grave. "Well?" Richard demanded. The doctor took a deep breath. "Mr. Dawson, I don't know how to explain this. The results are clear. You are not sterile. You never were." Richard's world seemed to collapse. How is this possible?" "I don't know." The doctor's voice trembled. "Today's tests show a normal sperm count. Excellent mobility. You are perfectly capable of having children." Richard stood up abruptly, staggering. 15 years believing a lie. "Mr. Dawson, I swear I don't understand. The previous tests—" "Enough," Richard shouted. "Enough of the lies." He stormed out of the consultation room like a hurricane, ignoring the doctor's calls. His brain was buzzing. If he wasn't sterile, why had Sarah left him? Why hide the pregnancy? And who had put his name on Peter's certificate? In the parking lot, Richard stopped, breathing heavily. He needed answers. And there was only one person who could provide them. With trembling hands, he dialed the number the investigator had provided. 3 rings. 4. And then, "Hello?" Sarah's familiar voice came from the other end of the line. Richard closed his eyes, his heart pounding. "Sarah? It's me, Richard? We need to talk." A heavy silence followed. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was laden with emotion. "Richard, I knew this day would come, but I didn't think it would be so soon." "What are you talking about? What's going on, Sarah?" Another moment of silence. And then, "You're right. We need to talk, but not over the phone. Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. at Central Park. Near the lake." Before Richard could respond, the line went dead. He stood there in the parking lot, phone still in hand. The day's revelations swirled in his mind like a mad carousel. Tomorrow he would finally get his answers. But something told him the truth would be much more complicated and painful than he ever imagined. This chapter intensifies the mystery, adding more layers to the plot. The revelation that Richard is not sterile raises even more questions about the past and the motivations of the characters involved. The final phone call with Sarah creates a powerful hook for the next chapter, leaving the reader eager to find out what secrets she will reveal during the meeting in the park. The morning in Central Park was surprisingly cool for a summer day in New York City. Richard arrived 15 minutes early, his mind a whirlwind of questions and repressed emotions. As he walked toward the lake, Richard noticed how out of place he looked in his Italian suit amidst the morning joggers and mothers with strollers. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, exposed. At exactly 10 a.m. tachos, he saw her. Sarah was sitting on a bench near the lake, her hair now streaked with grey, but still as beautiful as he remembered. When their eyes met, 15 years seemed to evaporate in an instant. "Richard," she said softly, standing up. "Sarah," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. For a moment, they stood there, measuring each other, the weight of a decade and a half of secrets between them. "You saw him, didn't you?" Sarah finally broke the silence. "Peter." Richard nodded stiffly. "Why, Sarah? Why did you hide this from me all these years?" Sarah looked away, fixing her gaze on the lake. "It's complicated, Richard." Complicated? The anger Richard had been repressing finally overflowed. "I spent 15 years believing I was sterile. 15 years thinking I could never have children. And all this time, you think it was easy for me," Sarah retorted, her eyes flashing. "Raising a child alone, unable to tell anyone the truth." "What truth, Sarah? Because so far, all I have are lies." A group of ducks took flight from the lake, startled by Richard's shout. Sarah looked around, aware of the curious glances from passers-by. "Let's walk," she suggested. "This conversation will be long." As they walked along the lake's edge, Sarah began to speak. "When you told me about the sterility diagnosis, I was devastated. But a few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant." Richard stopped abruptly. "And why didn't you tell me?" Sarah sighed deeply. "Because in the same week I received a visit. 2 men in suits, claiming to represent important interests. They showed me photos, Richard, photos of you with dangerous people. They said you were involved in shady deals, money laundering, things like that." Richard felt his blood run cold. "That's absurd. I know that now," Sarah interrupted him. "But at the time, they were very convincing. They said that if I stayed with you, both I and the baby would be in danger." Richard staggered as if he'd been punched. "So you ran away to protect me, to protect Peter?" Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "They gave me a new identity, a place to live. The condition was that I never contact you again. But my name on the birth certificate, that was years later," Sarah explained. "When Peter was 5, one of the men came back. He said things had changed, that it was safe to acknowledge your paternity. I didn't understand at the time, but now what?" Richard demanded. "Now I realize we were pawns in a much bigger game, Richard. Someone wanted you isolated, focused only on business, no family, no distractions." Richard's mind was spinning. Who would have the power and motives to orchestrate something like this? And why? "And Peter," he asked, his voice breaking, "does he know about me?" Sarah shook her head. "He knows his father is a busy businessman who can't be present, but he doesn't know who you really are." Richard felt a sharp pain in his chest. 15 years lost, a lifetime of moments he would never have with his son. "I want to meet him," he said firmly. "I have that right." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. "Richard, it's not that simple. If we decide to do this, we need to think about Peter first. And there's more. More? What else could there be?" Sarah hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "One of the men who approached me. I recently recognized him in a photo, standing next to you." Richard felt the world spin. "Who?" "Your friend, the lawyer. Charles?" The shock of the revelation hit Richard like a wave. Charles, his closest friend, his confidant. How could he be involved in this? As the sun rose higher in the New York sky, Richard realized that the mystery was much deeper and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And to unravel it, he would have to question everything and everyone he trusted. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I need you to tell me everything, every detail, because now it's not just about me and you. It's about protecting our son." Sarah nodded, and together they sat on a nearby bench, ready to unearth 15 years of secrets and lies. The truth, Richard knew, would be just the beginning of a much more complex journey. This chapter brings crucial revelations, significantly increasing the complexity of the plot. The introduction of a larger conspiracy involving Richard's past adds a layer of suspense to the story. The suspicious involvement of Charles creates a new conflict and establishes a climate of distrust. The chapter ends leaving the reader eager to discover more about the conspiracy and how Richard will deal with these new revelations. Richard spent the night tossing and turning in his luxurious penthouse bed. Sarah's revelations echoed in his mind, mingling with fragments of memories and newly formed suspicions. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the windows, he was already up, determined to unravel the web of lies surrounding his life. At exactly 7 a.m., his phone rang. It was Charles. "Richard, where were you yesterday? You cancelled all your appointments without notice." "The board is in an uproar." Richard hesitated, Sarah's voice echoing in his ears. "Charles is involved." He decided to play along. "Sorry, Charles, I had a personal emergency. I'll be at the office in an hour." "Great," Charles replied, his voice betraying slight relief. "We have that meeting with the Chinese investors, remember?" "Of course," Richard lied. "I'll be prepared." After hanging up, Richard felt a bitter taste in his mouth. How could he face Charles knowing what he knew now? More importantly, how could he extract the truth from him? On the way to the office, Richard made a call he never imagined making. "Sigma Investigations Agency. Good morning. This is Richard Dawson. I need a full investigation on Charles Anderson. Background, finances, connections, everything. Sir, investigating a prominent lawyer like Mr. Anderson can be complicated." "Money is not an issue," Richard cut in. "I want results in 48 hours. Arriving at Dawson Enterprises, Richard was immediately engulfed by the frantic routine of the corporate world. Meetings, phone calls, multi-million-dollar decisions. But for the first time in years, it all seemed empty, meaningless. In the meeting with the Chinese investors, Richard found himself observing Charles. His friend conducted the negotiations with his usual skill, but now Richard noticed small details. The way Charles avoided direct eye contact, the subtle tension in his shoulders. After the meeting, Charles approached him in the hallway. "Richard, are you okay? You seem distant." For a moment, Richard considered confronting him right there. But no, it wasn't the right time yet. "I'm fine, just tired. Charles, do you remember Sarah?" The reaction was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a slight stiffening of posture, a blink too quick. "Sarah, your ex-girlfriend?" "Of course. Why?" Richard forced a smile. "Nothing important, just old memories." The rest of the day dragged on. Richard could barely concentrate, his mind divided between the newly discovered past and the uncertain future. At 6 p.m., when most employees had already left, his phone vibrated. It was the Sigma agency. "Mr. Dawson, we have preliminary information on Mr. Anderson. You will want to hear this." Richard locked his office door. "I'm listening." "In the last 15 years, Mr. Anderson has received monthly deposits from an offshore company in the Cayman Islands. The amounts are substantial." Richard's heart raced. "From whom?" "The company is registered under several layers of secrecy, but we traced it back to a name, John Tavares." Richard's world seemed to freeze. John Tavares? His mentor? The man who had introduced him to the business world? The man he considered almost a father? "Are you sure?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Absolutely, sir. There's more. We found records of frequent trips by Mr. Anderson to a rural property near New York. The property is in the name of—" "Let me guess," Richard interrupted. "John Tavares." "Exactly." After hanging up, Richard stood still, staring at the panoramic view of New York through his office window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. Shadows that seemed to reflect the dark revelations unfolding. A light knock on the door startled him. Richard? It was Charles's voice. Are you still here? Can we talk? For a moment, Richard considered ignoring him, but then an idea began to form. Come in, Charles. His friend, would it still be appropriate to call him that, entered, carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. I thought we could relax a bit. You seem tense lately. Richard forced a smile. Great idea. As Charles poured the drinks, Richard watched him closely. Every gesture, every expression could be a clue. A toast, Charles said, raising his glass. To the success of Dawson Enterprises. Richard raised his glass but didn't drink. Charles, how long have we been friends? Charles seemed surprised by the question. Almost 20 years, right? Since we started at old Tavares's company. And in all that time, have you ever hidden something important from me? The lawyer laughed, but there was a note of nervousness in his voice. What kind of question is that, Richard? Of course not. Richard swirled the whiskey in his glass, thoughtful. You know, it's funny how life turns out. Just yesterday, I was thinking about how things could have been different if I had had children. Charles choked slightly on his drink. Children. But the diagnosis. Oh yes, the diagnosis. Richard leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Charles. Curious how medicine can be wrong, isn't it? Charles's face visibly paled. Hi, Richard. What are you talking about? In that moment, Richard was certain. All the small reactions, the subtle lapses. Charles knew. He knew everything. I'm talking about Peter, Charles, my son. The glass slipped from Charles's hands, shattering on the floor. The sound seemed to echo in the tense silence of the office. I don't know what you're talking about, Charles stammered, standing up abruptly. It's late, I should go. Richard also stood up, his voice calm but filled with contained fury. Sit down, Charles. We have a lot to talk about. For a moment, it seemed Charles would flee, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. Slowly, he sat back down. How did you find out? That doesn't matter now, Richard replied. What matters is that you're going to tell me everything, every detail. Why did you lie to me? Why did you push Sarah and my son away? What's John Tavares's role in all this? Charles buried his face in his hands. When he looked up again, his eyes were teary. Richard, you don't understand. It was all for your own good. My good, Richard nearly shouted. Depriving me of my son was for my good. John, he had plans for you, big plans, a family. That would be a distraction. Richard's anger gave way to deep sadness. So my life, my happiness meant nothing. I was just a pawn in John's game. Charles seemed genuinely regretful. At first, yes. But over time, Richard, you became more than John ever imagined. You exceeded all expectations, and now what, Charles? Now John fears you, fears what you might do if you discover the whole truth. Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. What truth, Charles? What else are you hiding from me? Before Charles could respond, Richard's phone rang. It was an unknown number. With a warning look at Charles, he answered, Mr. Dawson. It was Sarah's voice, trembling and scared. Richard, something happened. It's Peter. He's missing. Richard's world crumbled. As panic consumed him, he realized the game had changed. It was no longer just about discovering the truth. Now it was a race against time to save his son, and in this race, he didn't know whom he could trust. The Dawson Enterprises office, once a symbol of Richard's power and success, now felt like a claustrophobic prison. Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Peter is missing. His son, whom he barely knew, was in danger, and it was his fault. Richard, Charles's voice brought him back to reality. What happened? Richard faced his supposed friend, anger and fear battling in his chest. Peter has been kidnapped. Charles's face paled even more, if that was possible. My God, Richard, I swear I didn't know. No more lies, Richard exploded, grabbing Charles by the lapels. Who did this? Was it John? I don't know, Charles stammered, but it's possible. John always said he had a plan B in case you discovered the truth. Richard released Charles, feeling suddenly exhausted. What truth, Charles? What could be so important as to justify kidnapping an innocent child? Charles hesitated, the conflict evident in his eyes. Finally, he sighed deeply. Dawson Enterprises isn't exactly what you think it is, Richard. What do you mean? The company. It was built with dirty money, a lot of dirty money. John used his political connections and underworld contacts to raise the initial capital, large-scale money laundering. Richard felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. His entire life, everything he had worked for. And me, what was my role in all this? You were the clean face, Charles explained. The young prodigy, the self-made man. No one would question the source of the money if it came from a business genius. Nausea hit Richard in waves. 15 years of his life, based on a lie. And now, his son was paying the price. Where is John? Charles shook his head. I don't know. He has several properties scattered across the country. He could be anywhere. Richard picked up his phone, dialing quickly. Sarah, I'm on my way. Don't leave the house. Turning to Charles, his voice was icy. You're coming with me. And you'd better start thinking about how we can find John, or I swear I'll turn you over to the police right now. The drive to Sarah's apartment was tense. Richard drove like a madman through New York streets, while Charles made frantic calls, trying to locate John or any information about Peter. When they arrived, Sarah greeted them with red eyes from crying. Richard, I'm so sorry. I just left him for a moment to buy bread, and when I returned, Richard instinctively hugged her, surprised by the familiarity of the gesture even after so many years. It's not your fault, Sarah. We'll find him. While Sarah recounted the details of the disappearance, Richard's phone vibrated. It was the Sigma agency. Mr. Dawson, we have an urgent update. We tracked suspicious activity at one of Mr. Tavares's properties, a farm about 2 hours from New York. Richard felt a spark of hope. Send me the address and call the police. Sir, given the delicate nature of the situation, it might be better. Do as I said. Richard hung up, turning to Charles and Sarah. We have a lead. Let's go. I'm coming with you, Sarah declared, her voice leaving no room for argument. The drive to the farm seemed endless. Richard drove, his face a mask of determination. Sarah, in the passenger seat, alternated between moments of silent crying and forced calm. In the back seat, Charles seemed engulfed in guilt and fear. When they finally arrived, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows over the fields. The farm seemed deserted, but a car parked near the main house indicated someone's presence. Stay here, Richard instructed, grabbing a gun from the glove compartment. Richard, no! Sarah grabbed his arm. It's too dangerous. It's our son in there, he replied, his voice breaking on the word son. It was the first time he had said it out loud. Approaching the house cautiously, Richard heard voices. One of them, unmistakable, belonged to John Tavares. The other, his heart leaped. It was Peter. Peering through a broken window, Richard saw a surreal scene. John, the man he had considered a mentor for so many years, was sitting in an armchair, chatting animatedly with Peter. The boy didn't seem frightened. On the contrary, he was laughing at something John said. Richard's confusion was interrupted by a sound behind him. Turning quickly, he found himself face to face with an armed man. Oh well, the man smiled without humor. If it isn't Richard Dawson himself, the boss will be pleased to see you. Forced inside the house, Richard was taken to the room where John and Peter were. Ah, Richard, John exclaimed, as if greeting an old friend for dinner. How nice of you to join us. Peter and I were having a fascinating conversation about the future of business in America. Richard could hardly believe what he was seeing. Peter, his son, chatting animatedly with the man who had orchestrated his entire life's lie. Peter, Richard said softly, are you okay? The boy looked at him curiously. I'm fine. Mr. Tavares is very nice. He said he's going to teach me everything about business, like he did with you. The realization hit Richard like a punch. John wasn't just kidnapping Peter. He was trying to reprogram him, mold him as he had done with Richard years ago. Enough of this madness, John, Richard growled. Let my son go. John laughed, a cold and calculating sound. Your son? Richard, you barely know him. I, on the other hand, have been watching Peter for years. He has potential, you know, much more than you had at his age. What are you talking about? Oh, Richard, do you really think I would leave such a valuable asset like Peter completely off my radar? I've been following him since birth. Every step, every achievement at school. He is the future of Dawson Enterprises. Richard's anger reached a new level. You're crazy. The police are on their way. It's over, John. John's smile faltered for a moment, but then returned. The police, Richard? Do you really think they would do anything against me? Half the precincts in New York are on my payroll. At that moment, a noise outside caught everyone's attention. Sarah and Charles came running in, followed by several armed men. Gentlemen, John began, but was interrupted by Charles. Enough, John, it's over. Richard looked at Charles, confused. The lawyer took a step forward, showing a badge. FBI. John Tavares, you're under arrest for money laundering, extortion and kidnapping. Richard's world spun. Charles, an undercover agent. All this time, as John was handcuffed, protesting and threatening, Sarah ran to hug Peter. Richard stood paralyzed, watching the scene as if he were a spectator in his own life. Charles approached him. Richard, I'm sorry for all the lies. We've been investigating John for years, but we needed concrete evidence. You were our best chance to get to him. Richard could barely process everything. His world, already shaken, now completely collapsed. Watching Sarah and Peter, a family he wasn't part of, Richard felt the weight of 15 years of lies and manipulations. His entire life had been an elaborate farce. As night fell over the farm and the police sirens echoed in the distance, Richard Dawson faced the harshest truth of all. To save his son and redeem his past, he would have to dismantle everything he had built and start over from scratch. The journey to become the father Peter deserved, and the man he always believed himself to be, was just beginning, and it would be the hardest battle of his life. The cold morning light invaded the hotel room where Richard had spent the night. He had barely slept, and his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The revelations of the previous night still echoed in his head. The truth about Dawson Enterprises, Peter's kidnapping, Charles's secret identity as an FBI agent. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. It was Sarah, her tired eyes reflecting the exhaustion Richard felt. Peter is sleeping, she said softly, entering the room. So I finally managed to calm him down. Richard nodded, unable to find words. The silence between them was heavy, laden with 15 years of secrets and regrets. How is he dealing with all this? Richard finally asked. Sarah sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. He's confused, scared. He tries to act like everything's okay, but I can see it in his eyes. Richard, he needs you now more than ever. The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He, who always had answers for everything, now felt completely lost. I don't know how to be a father, Sarah. 15 years, I've lost so much time. Sarah reached out, gently touching Richard's arm. It's never too late. Peter is an incredible boy. He'll give you a chance, but you have to be there for him. Before Richard could respond, his phone vibrated. It was Charles. Richard, we need to talk. It's urgent. 20 minutes later, Richard met Charles in a discreet cafe in the city center. The lawyer, no, the FBI agent, looked as exhausted as Richard felt. The situation is more complicated than we thought, Charles began, his voice low. We found more documents. John's network is bigger than we imagined. Richard felt a chill down his spine. What does that mean? It means you and Peter might still be in danger. John had powerful partners, people who won't be happy to see their operations exposed. The reality of the situation hit Richard with full force. It wasn't enough to have lost everything he believed in. Now his life and that of his newly discovered son were at risk. What do you suggest we do? Charles looked around as if afraid of being overheard. Oh, you need to disappear for a while. We have a witness protection program. No, Richard interrupted sharply. I'm not running away, not now that I finally have the chance to know my son. Richard, be reasonable. It's Peter's safety that's at stake. The mention of his son's name made Richard hesitate. He knew Charles was right, but the idea of hiding, of abandoning everything. Give me 24 hours, he finally said. I need to put some things in order. Charles reluctantly nodded. All right, but be discreet. And Richard, Be careful who you trust. Back at the hotel, Richard found Peter awake, watching cartoons with a distant look. When he saw Richard, the boy straightened up, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in his eyes. "Hey, Peter," Richard said softly, feeling extremely awkward. "Can we talk for a bit?" Peter nodded, turning off the TV. Richard sat next to him, searching for the right words. "I know all this must be very confusing for you," he began. "And I'm sorry for not being there in your life until now." Peter studied him for a moment before speaking. "Mom said you didn't know about me. Is it true?" Richard felt his heart tighten. "It's true. If I had known, well, many things would have been different. Mr. Tavares said you were a great businessman," Peter continued. "That I could be like you one day." The mention of John made Richard's blood boil, but he kept calm. "Peter, there are many ways to be successful in life. The most important thing is to be a good person, someone people can trust. Like you." The innocent question hit Richard like an arrow. How could he explain to a child that his entire life had been built on lies? "I made mistakes, Peter, many mistakes, but I'm trying to be better now, and part of that is being here with you." Peter seemed to consider this for a moment. "Are you going to leave again?" "No," Richard replied firmly. "Never again. We're in this together now, okay?" A small smile formed on Peter's lips, and Richard felt something melt inside him. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. The moment was interrupted by Sarah, who entered the room hurriedly. "Richard, there's someone downstairs asking for you. Says he's from the company." An alarm rang in Richard's mind. No one should know he was there. "Peter, stay here with your mum. Don't open the door for anyone." Richard descended the hotel stairs, alert to every movement. In the lobby, a familiar figure awaited him, his secretary, Andrea. "Mr. Dawson," she said, her voice trembling. "Sorry to bother you, but something's happening at the company. Strange men taking documents." Richard felt panic rising. John's network was moving fast, trying to cover their tracks. "Andrea, listen carefully. Go home now. Don't return to the company, and don't tell anyone you saw me." As soon as Andrea left, Richard called Charles. "They're cleaning out Dawson Enterprises. We need to act now." "Damn," Charles cursed. "Okay, I'm sending a team there. As for you, Richard, it's time to go. I have a safe place for you." Back in the room, Richard found Sarah and Peter ready, having heard part of the conversation. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, the worry evident in her voice. Richard looked at his son, so young and already facing so much, to a safe place. "Trust me." As they prepared to leave, Richard looked out the hotel window at the city that had always been his home, New York, the metropolis that had seen him rise to the top and now witnessed his fall. But as he felt Peter's small hand in his, Richard realized it wasn't a fall. It was a new beginning, a chance to build something real, something that truly mattered. "Says we're ready," he said, turning to Sarah and Peter. And so, under the cloak of the falling night, the unlikely family left the hotel, heading towards an uncertain future, but together. Richard knew the challenges ahead would be enormous, rebuilding his life, protecting his son, facing the consequences of years of lies. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. And that, Richard realized, made all the difference. As the car drove them away from the city, Richard made a silent promise. No matter what lay ahead, he would be the father Peter deserved. And together, they would write a new chapter, one based on truth, love, and redemption. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Richard Dawson was ready to face it. With his son by his side and the chance for a new beginning, he knew the true challenge and the true reward was just beginning. The country house on the outskirts of Boston looked like something out of a postcard. Surrounded by dense vegetation and overlooking a serene lake, it was the perfect refuge for a family seeking peace. But for Richard, Sarah, and Peter, it was a gilded prison. 3 weeks had passed since they left New York in a hurry. 3 weeks of alarming news about the disintegration of Dawson Enterprises, sensational headlines, and a constant sense of imminent danger. Richard watched Peter playing by the lake, trying to reconcile the image of the carefree boy with the gravity of their situation. Sarah approached, placing a cup of coffee in his hands. He seems to be adapting well, Sarah commented, following Richard's gaze. Yeah, Richard sighed. Sometimes I wonder if he really understands what's happening. Sarah smiled sadly. Children are resilient, but don't be fooled, Richard. He feels everything. He just deals with it differently. The silence that followed was interrupted by the ringing of Richard's phone, a prepaid, untraceable device provided by Charles. Any news? Richard answered without preamble. Charles's voice sounded tense on the other end of the line. Things are getting worse, Richard. We found more documents. John's network is bigger than we thought. Politicians, judges, even. A scream cut through the air, interrupting Charles. Richard turned abruptly, only to see Peter being dragged by two masked men toward a black car. Peter! Sarah's scream echoed through the valley as she ran towards their son. Richard dropped the phone, running after her, but it was too late. The car sped away, leaving only a cloud of dust and the echo of Peter's desperate cries. No, my son! Richard fell to his knees, the reality of what had just happened hitting him like a punch to the gut. Sarah was in shock, trembling uncontrollably. How did they find us? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Richard stood up, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Charles, he murmured, picking up the fallen phone. Charles, Peter has been kidnapped. Track the car. Do something. My God. Charles's voice sounded distant, shocked. Richard, stay where you are. I'm sending a team right now. But Richard couldn't wait. Every second that passed was another second Peter was in the hands of his kidnappers. Sarah, go inside. Lock all the doors and windows. Don't open for anyone but me or Charles. What are you going to do? Sarah asked, fear evident in her voice. Richard was already running to the car. I'm going to bring our son back. The winding roads that snaked through the region were a challenge even for experienced drivers. For Richard, driving like a madman, they were a test of skill and luck. Every curve could hide the kidnapper's car. Every intersection was a critical decision. His phone rang again. It was Charles. Richard, we've located the car. It's heading north, probably toward... Send me the coordinates, Richard interrupted. I'll intercept them. This is madness. You're not trained. You're not armed. He's my son, Charles, Richard shouted. I'm not standing by while he's in danger. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. All right, I'm sending the coordinates. But Richard, please wait for reinforcements. Don't do anything stupid. Richard hung up without responding. At that moment, he would do anything to save Peter. The coordinates led him to a secondary road, almost hidden among the vegetation. Richard slowed down, all his senses on high alert. Then he saw it, the black car, parked at the entrance to an old abandoned warehouse. His heart raced. Peter was there, so close yet so far. Richard parked at a safe distance and approached cautiously. Voices echoed from inside the warehouse. Richard crept up to a broken window, trying to listen. The boy is our guarantee. Dawson will do exactly what we want if he wants to see his son again. The voice was familiar. With a shock, Richard recognized it. One of the directors of Dawson Enterprises, someone he had considered trustworthy. And if he doesn't cooperate, another voice asked, then the boy becomes expendable. Richard's blood ran cold. The reality of the situation hit him with full force. This wasn't just about him or the company. Peter's life was at stake. Without thinking twice, Richard picked up a piece of wood from the ground and, gathering all his courage, entered the warehouse. Let my son go. His shout echoed through the empty space. The kidnappers, caught by surprise, turned around. Peter was there, tied to a chair, his eyes wide with fear and relief at seeing his father. Dawson, the director quickly recovered. What a pleasant surprise. You saved us the trouble of coming after you. It's over, Richard said, his voice trembling with rage. Let Peter go, it's me you want. The man laughed, a cold and humorless sound. Oh, Richard, do you really think it's that simple? You know too much. You've seen too much. And now, well, let's just say we need to clean up John's mess. Richard took a step forward, the piece of wood raised. I won't let you hurt my son. Dad. Peter's voice was small, scared. In that moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. The kidnappers advanced. Richard swung the piece of wood, hitting one of them. Screams, confusion, the sound of breaking glass, and then the deafening roar of sirens. FBI! Everybody freeze! The warehouse door burst open, giving way to dozens of armed agents. Charles was at the front, his gun drawn. "Release the boy now!" Chaos ensued. The kidnappers, caught off guard, tried to resist but were quickly subdued. Richard ran to Peter, untying him with trembling hands. "It's okay now, son. It's okay. You're safe." Peter clung to him, sobbing. Richard hugged him tightly, tears streaming down his face. Charles approached, looking both relieved and furious. "You idiot! You could have gotten yourself killed. And Peter—" "Thank you," Richard interrupted him. "Thank you for arriving in time." The agent sighed, his anger dissipating. "You're lucky we tracked your phone, but this—" He gestured to the warehouse full of agents and handcuffed kidnappers. "This is just the tip of the iceberg." Richard nodded, still holding Peter. "I know. And I'm ready to face whatever comes. But first I need to take my son home." As they left the warehouse, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Richard looked at Peter, at his son's tired but relieved face, and felt a renewed determination. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be investigations, trials. The whole truth about Dawson Enterprises would come to light. But none of that mattered at that moment. What mattered was the second chance he had been given, the chance to be the father Peter deserved, to build something true and honest. "Let's go home, son," Richard said softly. Peter looked at him, a small smile forming on his lips. "Home?" Richard smiled back, feeling true hope for the first time in weeks. "Yes, Peter, to our home, together." As they drove away from the warehouse, leaving behind the chaos and darkness, Richard knew this was just the first battle of many. But with Peter by his side and the determination to do the right thing burning in his chest, he was ready to face any challenge. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. From that moment on, Richard Dawson would live for the truth, for justice, and above all, for the love of his son. The sun had barely risen when Richard was awakened by an insistent knock on the door. He got up quickly, his heart racing, the recent events still vivid in his mind. Peter slept soundly in the next room, exhausted after the trauma of the kidnapping. Opening the door, Richard was met with Charles's tense face. "We need to go," the FBI agent said without preamble. "Now." "What happened?" "John escaped custody." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. "How is that possible?" "I thought he was under maximum security." Charles ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. He had accomplices within the police force. "The corruption is deeper than we imagined." Richard felt panic rising. "And now, Charles said firmly, "we end this once and for all. But we need to act fast." In the next few minutes, the house turned into a whirlwind of activity. Sarah, awakened by the commotion, helped prepare Peter, while Richard gathered documents and evidence he had collected over the past few weeks. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, holding Peter close. Charles looked at Richard, then at Sarah. "You two and Peter are going to a safe location. Richard is coming with me." "No," Sarah protested. "We just went through a kidnapping. I'm not leaving Richard alone in this." Richard approached her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Sarah, please, I need to know you and Peter are safe. It's the only way I can do what needs to be done." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded reluctantly. Richard knelt in front of Peter. "Son, I need you to be strong now, okay? Go with your mum. I promise I'll come back to you." Peter, with a maturity beyond his years, hugged his father tightly. "Be careful, Dad." With a heavy heart, Richard watched as Sarah and Peter were escorted to an armored car. As soon as they left, he turned to Charles. "Where is John?" "Our informants say he's hiding at a property on the outskirts of Boston, an old farm not registered in his name." Richard felt a chill down his spine. He knew that place. It was where everything had started 15 years ago. The drive to the farm was tense. Richard mentally reviewed all the events that had led him to this point: the false infertility diagnosis, the years spent building Dawson Enterprises on lies, the reunion with Sarah, and the discovery of Peter. Charles, Richard broke the silence. There's something you need to know. The agent looked at him, curious. That farm, it's where John first recruited me. It's where he convinced me to be the clean face of his dirty operation. Charles nodded slowly. I suspected there was something like that. Richard, you know that when this is over, you'll have to answer for your actions, right? Richard swallowed hard, but his determination didn't waver. I know, and I'm ready to face the consequences. But first, we need to stop John. As they approached the farm, they saw they were not alone. Several FBI vehicles were already positioned, agents armed and ready, surrounding the perimeter. He's cornered, Charles explained. But John is dangerous. He won't go down without a fight. Richard looked at the farmhouse, an imposing structure that now seemed dark and threatening. Let me talk to him. What? No, it's too dangerous, Charles protested. Charles, I know him. I know how he thinks. Maybe I can convince him to surrender peacefully. The agent hesitated, weighing the options. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you wear a bulletproof vest and carry a communicator. At the first sign of danger, we're coming in. Minutes later, Richard stood on the farmhouse porch, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. He knocked on the door. John, it's me, Richard. We need to talk. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, John's voice came from inside the house. Come in, my boy. I was wondering when you'd show up. Cautiously, Richard entered. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn. John sat in an armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, appearing unnervingly calm for a man surrounded by the FBI. Ah, Richard, John smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. My protégé. My greatest creation, and my greatest disappointment. It's over, John, Richard said, keeping his voice steady. There's no way out. It's better if you surrender. John laughed, a bitter and tired sound. Surrender? To what end? To spend the rest of my days in a cell? No, my dear boy. This ends here today. It doesn't have to be this way. Cooperate. Tell them everything you know. Maybe we can work out a deal. A deal? John stood up, his voice rising. You don't understand, do you? There's no deal to be had. What we built, what we did. It goes far beyond me, beyond you, beyond Dawson Enterprises. Richard took a step forward. Then tell me. Help me understand. John looked at him for a long moment, as if evaluating him. Then, surprisingly, he began to speak. It all started 30 years ago. I was like you, Richard. Young, ambitious, wanting to change the world. But I quickly learned that the world doesn't change with good intentions. It changes with power, with money. He paused, taking a sip of whiskey. Dawson Enterprises was just the beginning, a piece on a much larger chessboard. Politicians, judges, businessmen, all part of the game. And you, Richard, you were my masterpiece. The young prodigy, the self-made man, the clean face for our dirty operation. Richard felt nauseous. Why me? Why do all this? John smiled sadly. Because you had potential. And because you reminded me of myself a long time ago. The revelation hit Richard like a lightning bolt. You're my father. The silence that followed was deafening. John didn't answer directly, but his look said it all. Impossible, Richard stammered. My parents died when I was a child. I grew up in an orphanage. A convenient story, don't you think? John said softly. It made it much easier to mold you the way I wanted. Richard's mind was spinning. His entire life, everything he thought he knew about himself, was a lie. And the infertility diagnosis? Peter, was all of this part of your plan? John sighed. The diagnosis was a genuine mistake. But when I found out about Peter, well, let's say I saw an opportunity to correct some past mistakes. Richard staggered, feeling betrayed on a level he didn't know was possible. Why? Why do all this? Power, Richard. True power comes from controlling the shadows, from pulling the strings without anyone seeing. And you were my chance to leave a legacy. At that moment, the door burst open violently. Charles and a team of agents stormed into the room. Enough talking, Charles announced. "John Tavares, you're under arrest." But John didn't seem surprised or disturbed. With a quick movement, he pulled a gun from inside his coat. "No," Richard shouted, throwing himself in front of John. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the room. Richard felt a sharp pain in his shoulder, stumbling back. Charles and the other agents reacted instantly, overpowering John. As John was handcuffed, he looked at Richard, who was being attended to by paramedics. "I'm sorry, son. I really am." Richard, fighting against the pain and confusion, met John's eyes. There was no anger there, only deep sadness and perhaps a glimmer of regret. In the hours that followed, the farmhouse turned into a crime scene. John was taken away under heavy guard, while Richard was treated and questioned. The complete truth about Dawson Enterprises and the corruption network began to emerge. It was already night when Richard was finally able to see Sarah and Peter. As he entered the secure room where they were, Peter ran to hug him. "Dad, are you okay?" Richard hugged his son, feeling tears in his eyes. "I'm okay, son. I'm okay." Sarah approached, worry evident on her face. "What happened? They told us you were shot." Richard looked at her, then at Peter. How could he explain everything he had discovered? How could he start to process the truth about his own origin? "It's a long story," he finally said. "But the important thing is that it's over. We're safe now." As he embraced his family, Richard knew the road ahead would be tough. There would be trials, investigations, and the whole truth would come out. But looking at Peter, the son he had almost lost, and now had the chance to truly know, Richard felt a certainty grow within him. No matter what the future held, he would face it with honesty and courage. For the first time in his life, Richard Dawson was ready to live in truth, no matter the consequences. The day had been long, full of shocking revelations and intense confrontations, but there, in that room, with Sarah and Peter, Richard finally felt he was where he belonged. The future was uncertain, but he would face it head-on, determined to be the man and father his son deserved. Richard Dawson's journey of redemption was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at the farmhouse. Fall had arrived in New York, bringing winds of change not only for the city but for Richard Dawson's life. The trial of John Tavares and his accomplices had dominated the headlines for weeks. The extent of the corruption network shocked the nation, leading to the downfall of powerful politicians and the restructuring of several companies, including Dawson Enterprises. Richard Dawes, keeping his promise of transparency, cooperated fully with the investigations. His decision to testify against John and expose his own involvement in the scheme surprised many, but for him, it was the only possible path to redemption. On that Saturday morning, Richard found himself in a small cafe in the city center, waiting anxiously. The doorbell chimed, and he saw Sarah and Peter enter. His heart warmed at the sight of his son's smile. "Dad!" Peter ran to hug him. Richard enveloped him in his arms, still amazed at how easily the boy had accepted him into his life. "Hey, champ, how was your week?" As Peter animatedly recounted his school adventures, Sarah joined them, a tired but genuine smile on her face. "Thank you for bringing him," Richard said softly. Sarah nodded. "He was eager to see you. Especially today. Today, the day of Richard's sentencing. After months of testimonies and negotiations, the judge would finally announce his decision. "Peter," Richard began, his voice serious, "remember what we talked about the things I did in the past?" The boy nodded, his large eyes attentive. "Yes. You said you did bad things, but you're trying to make it right." Richard swallowed hard, moved by the simplicity and wisdom in his son's words. "That's right. And today we'll find out how I can make it right. Are you going to leave again?" Peter's voice trembled slightly. Richard exchanged a look with Sarah before answering, "I don't know, son. But no matter what happens, I will always be here for you, understand?" Peter nodded, hugging his father again. After breakfast, Richard said goodbye to Sarah and Peter, promising to call as soon as he had news. The drive to the courthouse seemed longer than ever. Charles was waiting for him on the courthouse steps. "Ready?" Richard took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was packed. journalists, lawyers, onlookers, all eager to witness the conclusion of one of the biggest corporate scandals in the nation's history. When the judge entered, a tense silence fell over the room. Richard felt his heart pounding as the judge began to speak. "Richard Dawson," the judge's voice echoed. "This court acknowledges your full cooperation with the investigations and your crucial role in dismantling a corruption network that spanned decades." Richard held his breath. "However, we cannot ignore your participation in the events that led to this moment. Considering all factors, this court sentences Richard Dawson to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years, in addition to a fine to be determined." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Richard closed his eyes, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. 5 years. It wasn't the worst possible scenario, but it still meant time away from Peter, away from the life he had just begun to build. After the final procedures, Richard was taken to a private room to say goodbye to his loved ones before being transferred to prison. Sarah and Peter arrived minutes later, accompanied by Charles. "Dad!" Peter ran to him, tears in his eyes. Richard knelt, hugging his son tightly. "It's okay, Peter. Everything will be okay." "How long?" Sarah asked softly. 5 years, with the possibility of parole in 2, Richard replied, still holding Peter. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with restrained tears. "We'll be here, Richard, waiting for you." Her words touched him deeply. After everything they had been through, the fact that Sarah was still by his side, supporting him, meant more than he could express. "Peter," Richard said, looking into his son's eyes, "I need you to be strong, okay? Take care of your mum for me, and always remember, I love you more than anything in this world." Peter sniffled, nodding bravely. "I love you too, Dad. I'll wait for you." When it was time to leave, Richard hugged Sarah and Peter one last time. Charles approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry," the agent said. "I'll keep an eye on them for you." Richard nodded, grateful. "Thank you, Charles, for everything." As he was escorted out of the room, Richard looked back one last time. He saw Peter, small and brave, waving at him. He saw Sarah, strong and resilient, holding their son. And in that moment, Richard knew that no matter what the future held, he had something to fight for, something to return to. The next few years would be difficult, but Richard would face them with the certainty that in the end a second chance awaited him. A chance to be the man, the father and the citizen he always should have been. As the doors closed behind him, Richard Dawson took the first step on his journey of redemption, carrying in his heart the promise of a better future and the unconditional love of a son he had barely begun to know. The road would be long, but for the first time in his life, Richard knew exactly where he was going.